Hello, my name is Dominic, and welcome to my tutorial series, An Introduction to Unity 3D for Beginners. While I'm not a professional game developer, I do have a strong background in both teaching and education, and game development has been a hobby of mine ever since high school. Maybe you've always wanted to get into game development but don't really know where to start. Or you've looked at some other channels out there and they don't have the best explanations. Or they assume you have some prior knowledge that you simply don't have. There is no need to worry about that whatsoever, as this tutorial series assumes you have no prior experience in game development or programming. Now, Unity is one of the most popular game engines out there. It is a favorite pick for both hobbyists and beginners alike. It runs on the high-level programming language C#, which we'll be making our scripts for in Microsoft Visual Studio. In this tutorial series, we're going to be making a 3D platforming game where you can run around a 3D environment and pick up collectibles to win the game. By the end of this series, you should have a solid foundation when it comes to implementing core movement mechanics, programming basic scripts, adding sound, animation, visual effects to your game. I will be making this project on Windows, but you can also follow along on Mac, though there may be some slight differences. This part 1 of the tutorial series will help you install the Unity Hub along with Visual Studio and get us set up with our first Unity scene. If you find this video helpful or are looking to learn more about science, technology, engineering, and math, make sure to subscribe and leave your comments and questions in the section below. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, first we have to install Unity. So we're going to go to unity.com and then we're going to click download. That's going to take us to a page where we can download the Unity Hub installer for our machine. I'm using Windows, so I'll download the Unity Hub for Windows. You should see a download pop-up for the installer. Then click I agree and install it on a convenient location on your drive. Next, go to Microsoft Visual Studio's download page and download the free community version. Now when you're running the Visual Studio installer, make sure to include the Game Development with Unity workload package. If you already have Visual Studio installed, you can check if you have this Unity workload by clicking Modify on your installation version. Now that those have finished installing, we can open the Unity Hub. Unity Hub is a portal where you can manage multiple installations of the Unity editor, make new projects, access remote projects, and manage supported device platforms. First, we need to install a version of the Unity editor. I have some installed already, but you'll have to click Install Editor and choose one for yourself. There's a handful of versions to choose from, but it's best to go with the LTS version or long-term support version, which is the most stable version of Unity for each release year. Next, we have to choose our modules. As for DevTools, just make sure that you have Visual Studio selected. When actually exporting our game, we have to include what platform to build for. I'm simply going to leave Android and Windows selected and click Continue. Check that you've read the terms and conditions and click Install. Once your editor is finished installing, you can go to the Projects tab and click New Project and see the template screen. We're building a simple 3D platformer, so we can choose the 3D core template. Give your project a name and click Create Project. At this point, Unity will start gathering all the essential files to build your empty project. Once your project finally opens, you'll be met with the default scene and editor user interface, which consists of 4 main panels. First, there's the project panel, which contains all the files in your project, such as assets, settings, packages, libraries, and temporary files. The scene viewport provides you with a look inside your current scene. You can think of the scene as a level. The hierarchy is an organized list of all the objects in your scene, which includes the main camera, light, and potentially the player and more. Every game object has components which either characterize a game object or give it features and abilities. You can look at a game object's components in the inspector window and edit them. Now let's talk about some basic controls in the editor. To move your scene viewport camera, you can hold right-click and drag your mouse, which will rotate the camera. You can essentially pan the camera or translate it and move around with WASD. If you hold Shift while doing so, you'll move the camera faster. If you want to view a specific game object in your scene, you can click on it in the hierarchy and either double-click or press the F key to focus on it. Once you have a game object selected, we can actually move them around in our scene. One way we can do this is by selecting one of the axes arrows and dragging it. You can also select one of the 3 normal planes and drag the object along a certain plane. Lastly, you can edit the values of the transform position directly by either clicking on and dragging one of the axes or by typing in the number yourself. Similarly, we can rotate an object by choosing the Rotate tool or changing the rotation in the inspector. Now let's start actually adding some things into our scene. So we can start by right-clicking in the hierarchy and going to 3D Object, Plane. This will spawn a unit-sized plane in our scene. We could use all the same tools on this plane to change its transform, like translating, rotating, and scaling. But be careful. Many times when we add a new object into our scene, it doesn't spawn in at the origin. so we'll have to reset its transform position to 0, 0, 0. We'll also set its rotation to 0, 0, 0 and its scale to 1, 1, 1. Now we don't want all the objects in our scene to be a boring, blank white color, so we can give this plane a material. One way you can add a material to an object is by right-clicking in the project window and going to Create Material. We can give this material a name, like ground. If you go into the inspector, you can click on the albedo and give it a color of your liking. In order to apply the material onto the plane, you can literally just drag it out of the project window and onto the plane in the scene view. Now note that the plane makes a direct reference to the material in your projects folder, so that if you change the color of the material, it changes the color of the plane as well. I should also mention that you can drag around the different tabs in the editor and put them in whatever configuration you want. In case you end up with something that you don't like, you can always click on Layout and go back to the default. Finally, let's add our player. For now, we'll represent it with a 3D cube. Right-click in the hierarchy and go to 3D Object, Cube. Upon creation, we can give it the name Player. We'll place it slightly above the center of the plane by making its position 0, 1, 0. We can create another material in the projects folder and also name it Player. I'll go ahead and make it red. You can drag it on just like we did with the plane. Now we finally have a scene with our player and the ground. Let's press the play button and see what happens. Absolutely nothing. Aww. That's because we haven't added any kind of controller or physics to the player object. We can press play again to exit play mode. To add physics mechanics to a game object, we have to give it what is called a rigid body. In order to do that, we can click on the player in the hierarchy, go to the inspector, and on the bottom right, click Add a Component and search for rigid body. Note that the cube also has a component called Box Collider. Like its name suggests, the collider helps the Unity physics engine tell when an object is colliding or bumping into other objects that have colliders. In this case, the plane also has its own mesh collider, such that when the player falls to the ground, it will land on the floor. If you disable this mesh collider, the player will simply fall through the ground. Also notice that when I exit play mode, this change is undone. It's important to note that any changes made during play mode will not be saved once you exit play mode. So now we have a basic scene with the player in the ground and some physics. But we still can't control the movement of our player yet. And that's what we'll be doing in the next part of this tutorial series, where we'll write a script in C# that allows our player to move and jump around our scene. So hopefully during this tutorial, you were able to get familiar with the Unity editor and some of its basic functionality. We added some 3D shapes into a basic scene, and next time we're going to be adding some player movement. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for when the next video comes out, and I'll see you there.